The rain began at 4:47 in the morning. Not the gentle kind, not the kind that softens the edges of things. This was the kind of rain that found every fault line in every surface and pushed through, the kind of rain that exposed what had always been broken and simply waiting. The leak appeared on the 14th floor of the Vantara Group's regional headquarters at 5:02. Facilities management received the automated moisture alert at 5:09. By 5:23, two ceiling tiles in the executive corridor had bowed downward like tired knees. By 5:31, a small brown stain had bled through the suspended ceiling directly above the framed photograph of Vantara Group's founding patent, Patent US 7,842,201B2, the thermal panel membrane system that had made the company's first $40 million. No one noticed that detail yet. At 6:14 a.m., a man climbed out of a white Ford Transit van in the lower parking bay. He moved without urgency. He pulled a canvas tool bag from the back, checked the side pocket once, and zipped it closed. He was wearing work pants the color of old concrete, a gray thermal undershirt, and steel-toed boots that had been resoled twice. His hair was wet before he even reached the entrance. He did not run. He walked at exactly the pace of a man who has never needed to perform urgency for an audience. He signed in at the service desk. He wrote his name in the visitor log in careful block letters. Daniel Avery, Roofing and Waterproofing, Contractor, Precision Building Services. The security guard, a young man named Marcus who was halfway through a lukewarm coffee, glanced at the name and handed over a laminated badge without looking up from his phone. Daniel Avery clipped the badge to his left breast pocket. He took the service elevator to the 14th floor. He did not know that the photograph of patent US 7,842,201B2 was 6 feet from where he would set down his bag. He did not know yet what that patent was. Daniel Avery was 41 years old. He was not remarkable to look at, medium height, broad shoulders that had begun to carry a slight forward curve, the posture of a man who has spent years working at heights, always leaning slightly into the surface in front of him. His hands were large and competent. The knuckles of his right hand bore 3 small scars arranged like a constellation, a souvenir from a job in 2019 when a bracket had slipped in cold weather. He had finished the job before going to the urgent care clinic. He lived in a 2-bedroom rental unit in the Fairfield district, the older part of the city, where the streets were narrow and the trees were large and the landlords were slow to respond to anything except a rent increase. The apartment was on the 2nd floor of a red brick building. There was a window in the kitchen that caught the afternoon light at an angle that made the room briefly, unexpectedly beautiful around 4:30 each day. Daniel had arranged the small table near that window deliberately, though he had never told anyone that. His daughter's name was Rosie. She was 8. She had her mother's eyes, dark brown with a slight upward tilt at the outer corners that made her look, even in concentration, faintly amused at the world. She had Daniel's stubbornness, which expressed itself not as defiance but as a settled, quiet refusal to give up on things. She had been teaching herself piano from library books and online videos for 4 months. She played the same 12 bars of a Chopin nocturne every evening with increasing precision and decreasing frustration. And Daniel would sit at the kitchen table after dinner and listen without moving, as though movement might break something. Rosie's mother, Claire, had died 27 months ago. Pancreatic cancer, diagnosed late as it usually is and moved quickly as it usually does. She was 38. She had been a landscape architect. She had loved Japanese maples and terrible crime fiction and the particular quality of silence in the hour after a snowfall. She had been funny in a way that surprised people who expected someone quieter based on her stillness. She had been Daniel's anchor to a particular version of himself that he was still, 27 months later, trying to locate without her. After Claire died, Daniel took a leave from his previous work. It was not planned. One morning he simply did not go. He sat in the kitchen near the window and watched the light move. He sat there for 3 days, eating cereal and not answering his phone until Rosie, then 5.5, already unreasonably sensible, came and sat across from him and placed her small hand flat on the table between them. She did not say anything. He looked at her hand and then at her face. He went back the next day. Not to the previous work, to something else. Something with his hands, outdoors, solvable in a day. He'd gotten his roofing certification 6 weeks later. He'd been doing it for just over 2 years now when the call came in about the Vantara job. It was not the first time he'd been called to Vantara Group's regional headquarters. He'd patched a section of flashing on the eastern face 18 months ago, a 2-hour job, unremarkable. He knew the building, he knew its quirks, the slight negative slope on the northeast quadrant, the inadequate membrane overlap around the HVAC stack, the way water would find the junction between the parapet cap and the vertical face after sustained rainfall. He had noted all of this in his report after the previous visit. He had recommended a full membrane inspection. Facilities management had acknowledged the report and done nothing. That was also unremarkable. He rode the service elevator to the 14th floor with his canvas bag and a rolled membrane patch kit. The elevator doors opened onto a beige corridor with fluorescent lighting and the particular institutional smell, recycled air, carpet cleaner, and coffee from the break room at the far end that characterized every upper floor of every corporate building he had ever worked in. Water stains on 2 ceiling tiles. He found them in 11 seconds. He stood below them, tilted his head slightly, and traced the probable path upward in his mind. He took the stairs to the roof. The roof was a 4,200 square foot modified bitumen system, approximately 12 years old. He could see immediately that it was past its service life. The surface had begun to alligator, the characteristic craze-cracking pattern that indicated the asphalt had dried and lost flexibility. The flashing around the HVAC stack had pulled away at the northwest corner. The membrane overlap at the parapet junction was delaminating. He documented it methodically with his phone camera, moving in a slow grid pattern, pausing at each deficiency. He noted timestamps, approximate square footage of degraded sections, moisture readings from his pocket meter. He worked this way systematically without rushing for 40 minutes before he found the primary breach. It was at the base of the HVAC stack, exactly where he had suspected. A failed lap joint in the flashing, 6 inches long, had allowed water to infiltrate the insulation layer beneath. The leak had been developing for weeks. The rain this morning had simply been the final argument. He set down his bag, he crouched by the breach and examined it carefully. He ran his thumb along the edge of the failed lap joint. Then he opened his bag and began to work. He was on his second hour on the roof when the executive elevator opened on the 14th floor, and Vantara Group CEO, Meredith Voss, walked out into the corridor with the particular velocity of a woman who had already had 4 conversations before 8 a.m. and found all of them insufficient. Meredith Voss was 46. She had the kind of angular elegance that reads as authority in photographs and as intensity in person. Her hair was always the same dark, pulled back, uncompromising. She wore a gray blazer over a white silk shell and carried a leather portfolio that she never opened in meetings because she had already read everything in it. She had been CEO of Vantara Group's regional division for 3 years. She had not taken a full weekend off in 11 months. The skin beneath her eyes carried a faint lavender shadow that no amount of concealer, and she had tried several, entirely covered. She stopped when she saw the ceiling tiles. "What is this?" She said it to no one because there was no one immediately present. Her assistant, Jard Cho, was 14 steps behind her and breathing slightly faster than usual, which was his habitual condition. "Roof leak, Ms. Voss. Facilities called it in this morning. We have a contractor working on it now." She looked at the ceiling. She looked at the damp beige carpet below it. She looked at the framed patent on the wall nearby, which had an inch of discoloration along its upper right corner that had not been there yesterday. "That frame needs to be checked." "Of course." She moved on. She had a 7:45 with the legal team. She did not think about the contractor again. Not for another 6 hours. It was just after 2 in the afternoon when she saw him. She had come down to collect something from the 4th floor archives, a task she would normally have delegated but had taken on herself because she did not entirely trust the archive system since the reorganization, and because walking the stairs burned a kind of energy that 12-hour days of sitting could not. She was on her way back up via the internal stairwell, portfolio tucked under her arm, when she pushed through the door into the 14th floor corridor and nearly walked into a man crouching on the carpet. Daniel Avery was kneeling beside an open ceiling tile, shining a compact torch up into the cavity above. He had already replaced the 2 damaged tiles. He was checking the cavity for residual moisture. He had a small folded cloth on the floor beside him, and he had set his boots, which were wet from the roof, just outside the stairwell door on the mat so as not to track water on the carpet. He was working in his socked feet. He looked up when he heard the door. He did not scramble, he did not perform apology with his body. He simply looked up, made a brief assessment, and said, "Almost done." Meredith stopped. She looked at the open ceiling. She looked at the man. She looked at his boots, neatly placed on the mat outside the door. For a fraction of a second, something moved across her face. Then the moment closed. "Are you the one who's been up on the roof all day?" Since 6:40, Daniel said, and returned his attention to the ceiling cavity. She checked her watch, it was 2:17 p.m. That's a long time for a patch job. He did not answer immediately, he swept the torch slowly across the cavity. He replaced the ceiling tile. It's not a patch job, he said, rising to standing in a single unhurried movement. He picked up the folded cloth and set it beside his bag. The membrane system on the northeast quadrant needs to be replaced. The HVAC flashing has failed. There's moisture in the insulation over approximately 800 square feet. I've documented everything. The report will go to facilities. Meredith looked at him steadily. Can you do it? The repair work, yes. How long? 2 days of good weather, 3 if the insulation needs replacing below the deck. She nodded once, the way she nodded when the answer was acceptable but not exceptional. She was already moving. What's the cost estimate? He told her. She did not react to the number, which told him she had already expected it to be significant. She was 4 steps past him when she stopped. She did not turn around fully. She addressed the next question to the middle distance. Why are you doing this yourself? Doesn't your company send a crew? I am the crew, Daniel said. For the diagnostic and the first repair, I bring people in for the deck work. La pause. What's your name? She asked. Avery, it's on the work order. She did make a sound then, not quite a laugh. The compressed exhalation of someone who has registered a small rebuke without acknowledging it. She walked away. Daniel sat down on the floor, retrieved his boots from the mat and put them back on. He double-knotted the left one. He picked up his bag. He took the service elevator down. He signed out at the security desk at 2:34 p.m. and wrote his departure time in careful block letters. Marcus glanced at the clock and said, "Long day." Daniel said, "Not too bad," and walked to his van. He had a 3:30 school pickup. He drove across the city without the radio on. He parked outside Rosie's school 3 minutes early and sat with both hands in his lap and watched the front door the way you watch for something you are certain is coming and still look forward to. The door opened. Rosie came out at speed with her backpack bouncing and her coat half off and said something about a project on ecosystems and the injustice of a spelling test on Friday, all in the time it took her to reach the van and climb in. Daniel handed her the water bottle from the cup holder. She drank, she kept talking. He drove home. The name Elliot Marsh appeared in Vantara Group's internal org chart as Director of Strategic Partnerships and Vendor Relations. His office was on the 13th floor. His desk was always clean. His clothes were always precise, not expensive exactly, but chosen with a careful eye for what expense looked like from a distance. Elliot Marsh had been at Vantara Group for 7 years. He understood the architecture of institutional trust, how it was built, and more usefully, how it could be redirected. He had spent the last 18 months managing a quiet campaign, not loud, not aggressive, measured, the kind of strategy that leaves no single definitive move, only a long pattern of small ones. He had positioned himself as Meredith Voss's most reliable source of background intelligence on vendors, contractors, third-party partners, and personnel. He was thorough, he was calm, he was always early. He had also in the past 3 months been quietly building the case that Vantara Group needed to bring its facilities management entirely in-house, ending its contract with Precision Building Services and 5 other external contractors. He had prepared a cost-benefit analysis. He had circulated it upward. Meredith had not yet made a decision, but she was listening. On the afternoon of the first day, Elliot Marsh received an email alert from the facilities system indicating that a repair report had been filed by contractor D. Avery of Precision Building Services. He opened the report. He read it with his elbows on his desk and his fingertips pressed together. The report was thorough, unusually so. The documentation of moisture infiltration, the grid-by-grid mapping of the roof surface, the sequential numbering of identified deficiencies. It was the kind of report that facilities departments receive perhaps once every 3 years from an external contractor, because most contractors in this segment of the market documented minimally. They fixed what they were paid to fix and left. This report went beyond the scope of work in the original work order by approximately 400%. Elliot Marsh read it twice. He saved a copy of it. He closed the email. He made a note in a private file he kept on his personal laptop that he brought to and from the office in a slim leather bag. Then he went to find Meredith. He found her in the small conference room on the 14th floor, the one with the glass wall facing the corridor at 4:30, reviewing something with the legal team. He waited outside, visible through the glass, patient as furniture. When she came out, he fell into step beside her. I heard about the roof contractor, he said. Avery, she said, precision building. I pulled his work order history with us, 14 months of calls, 4 site visits. He paused exactly long enough, and I did a little background. Meredith glanced at him sideways. This was a habit of hers when she was paying attention but did not want to signal it overtly. He's a one-man operation, essentially, which explains the rates. Another pause. I'm just not sure a contractor of this scale is the right fit for a job of this complexity. The deck work he's recommending is significant. He said 2 days. He said 2 days for good weather. Elliot's tone was measured, mild. I'd hate for us to be 3 weeks into a roof replacement in November without the resources to complete it. Meredith looked at the ceiling, at the replaced tiles, at the faint ghost of the water stain. Get me 2 alternative bids, she said, by Thursday. Of course, he paused. I'll reach out to Avery and let him know the scope is under review. She nodded and turned toward her office. The call came to Daniel's phone at 5:15 that evening while he was standing at the stove making pasta. Rosie was at the kitchen table working on ecosystems. The light from the window had shifted to its 4:30 angle and then past it. The apartment was warm and smelled of garlic. He looked at the number. He did not recognize it. He answered anyway. Avery. The voice was smooth, professional. It introduced itself as Elliot Marsh, Director of Vendor Relations at Vantara Group. It explained, with great courtesy and zero specificity, that the scope of the roofing project was under review and that Precision Building Services should hold on the additional work pending a decision. Daniel asked when the decision would be made. Elliot said he hoped by end of week. Daniel asked if the documentation he'd submitted had been reviewed. Elliot said it had been received and was being assessed. Daniel said, all right. He hung up, he stirred the pasta, he got 2 bowls from the cabinet, he set the table. Rosie looked up from her ecosystems project. Was that a work call? Oh, yes. Everything okay? He set her bowl in front of her, fine. She returned to the ecosystems project. He sat down across from her. In the window, the light had gone blue. What Elliot Marsh had not planned on was Jard Cho. Jard was 26. He had been Meredith Voss's executive assistant for 14 months and had developed in that time an almost geological awareness of the subtle pressure shifts in Vantara's 14th floor. He noticed patterns the way other people noticed weather, as a constant ambient read that he processed without quite thinking about it. He had noticed Elliot Marsh. He had noticed the way Marsh materialized near Meredith at decision points. He had noticed the way Marsh's sentences were always technically accurate and somehow directional. He had not said anything because it was not his position to say anything, and because he could not have articulated precisely what he'd noticed beyond the shape of it. But on Tuesday, the morning of the second day, he found something. He found it by accident, which is how most important things are found. Meredith had asked him to pull all historical patent documentation related to Vantara Group's founding-era IP for a legal review meeting. It was routine. He went into the document management system and ran a comprehensive search. The system returned 847 files spanning the past 9 years. He began to sort them chronologically. He found the licensing folder. It contained payment records, royalty schedules, and correspondence related to all IP that Vantara Group had licensed from external parties. Standard corporate architecture. He almost closed it. He didn't close it because one of the records was flagged with an overdue review date, 3 years past, which was unusual in a company as procedurally precise as Vantara. He opened the flagged record. It was a licensing agreement for patent US 7,842,201B2, the thermal panel membrane system, the patent on the wall of the executive corridor, Vantara's founding technology. He had seen the framed document every day for 14 months without reading the technical description. He read it now. Then he searched the patent number. He sat very still for a while at his desk. The patent was assigned to a company called Meridian Structural Technologies LLC. It had been registered in 2009. The company had dissolved in 2015. The patent itself had a complex chain of assignment after dissolution. It had passed through a holding entity, then been transferred to an individual. He followed the transfer record. He read the name at the end of the chain. He read it again. Daniel James Avery. Jard Cho sat at his desk on the 14th floor of Vantara Group and looked at the name of the man who had been on his knees in the corridor the previous afternoon, replacing ceiling tiles in his socked feet. He looked at the licensing agreement. The annual royalty payment, $40,000 per year, had last been processed in 2019. There was a note in the file from accounts payable indicating that subsequent payment attempts had failed due to a change of address and no updated contact information. There had been no follow-up. The payments had been placed in a held funds account pending resolution of the recipient's contact details. For 5 years, Vantara Group had been using Daniel Avery's patent and not paying him. Not deliberately, not maliciously, simply through the architecture of institutional forgetting, not paying him. Jard closed the file, he opened it again, he checked the numbers 3 times, he saved a timestamped PDF of the full record to his personal drive. He sat very still for another 4 minutes. Then he walked to Meredith's office and knocked on the open door. She was on a call, she held up one finger, he waited in the doorway. He did not shift his weight. He stood with his hands at his sides and waited with the particular stillness of someone who has something important to say and is prepared to wait as long as it takes to say it correctly. She finished the call, she set down her phone. "What is it, Jard?" He set the printed document on her desk. He had underlined 2 things, the patent number and the name at the end of the assignment chain. "I was pulling the legal review documents," he said. "I found this." She picked it up, she read. She was a fast reader, one of the fastest he had ever seen, but she read this twice. "Daniel Avery," she said. "Oh, yes." A long pause. In the corridor outside, a phone rang. Someone answered it. The building held its ordinary sounds around them. "When did the payment stop?" 2019. She set the document down. She did not look at anything in particular for a moment. Her hand was flat on the desk. Her wedding ring, she was divorced, had been for 4 years, but still wore it on her right hand since the switch caught the light. "And Marsh called him off the job yesterday afternoon." Another pause. "Pull me everything," she said. "Full patent chain, all payment records, the licensing agreement from the beginning, everything." "I have it ready." She looked at him then fully, and something moved in her expression that was not quite gratitude, too complicated for that, but was adjacent to it. "Give me an hour." He left the documents on her desk. He went back to his workstation. He sat with his hands on the keyboard for a moment without typing, and then he got up and went to the break room and poured himself a glass of water and stood at the window looking at the parking lot below. Meredith Voss spent the next 90 minutes in her office with the door closed. She read the original licensing agreement, executed in 2015, when Vantara's legal team had traced the post-dissolution patent assignment and made contact with the individual holder. She read the correspondence. She read the royalty schedule. She read the accounts payable notes from 2019, 3 sentences, unremarkable, logging the failed address and the transfer to held funds. She read the held funds account balance. 4 years of unpaid royalties, $40,000 per year. $160,000 sitting in a held funds account inside Vantara Group, while the man who was owed it was sleeping 2 nights before in a second-floor apartment in the Fairfield district and waking before dawn to drive to her building and fix her roof. She put the document down. She looked at the wall of her office. There were 2 windows, one faced the city, one faced the interior light well. She looked at the interior one, the one that showed only the building looking back at itself. She did not recognize the expression on her own face in the glass. She called legal. The call lasted 22 minutes. Her tone throughout was the same tone she used for everything, measured, precise, slightly ahead of the conversation. But her pen, which she had picked up unconsciously at the start of the call, made small marks on the margin of the document without forming letters. By the end of the call, the margin held 7 small marks that were not words. Legal confirmed what Jard's research had shown. The patent was valid, active, and properly assigned to Daniel Avery. Vantara Group's use of the thermal panel membrane system, the foundational technology on which 3 of their current product lines were built, had been licensed appropriately and then allowed to lapse into a payment failure that had never been resolved. "Was there any attempt to contact the patent holder after 2019?" she asked. A pause on the line, files being moved. "There was 1 outbound letter to the previous address, returned undeliverable. After that," the voice trailed off. "After that," she said, "nothing." "Correct." She ended the call. She gathered all the documents into a single folder. She set it precisely at the center of her desk. She stood up and walked to her window, the one facing the city, and looked out for a while at the grid of glass and light and the gray sky beyond it. It had stopped raining. What Meredith did not know yet, and what Jard was still quietly piecing together on his workstation outside, was the second piece. It wasn't enough that the payments had lapsed through institutional neglect. That was significant, that was already a reckoning, but there was another layer and it belonged to Elliot Marsh. Jard found it in the vendor management logs. He had been thorough, he was always thorough, had been since childhood, was the kind of person who rechecked the door lock once and then once more and thought it was reasonable, and in being thorough he had pulled the full activity log for Precision Building Services in Vantara's vendor system. He had expected to see 4 site visit records, a handful of invoices, the work order from yesterday. He had expected nothing unusual. He found an access log entry dated 6 weeks ago. Someone had searched for Precision Building Services in the vendor system, had opened the company record, had run a cross-reference against the patent licensing database. The access timestamp was 11:43 p.m. on a Thursday. The user ID was a Mark. Jard sat with this for a while. Elliot Marsh had known. He had known, or at least suspected, that the contractor and the patent holder were the same person. He had run the cross-reference himself at 11:43 at night on a Thursday when the building was empty and the logs were unlikely to be reviewed. And then, with that knowledge, he had gone to Meredith and suggested that Precision Building Services was perhaps not the right fit for a project of this complexity. He had not said, "By the way, this contractor holds the patent on our founding technology, and we owe him $160,000. He had said, "I'd hate for us to be 3 weeks into a roof replacement without the resources to complete it." Jard printed the log. He stapled it to the rest of the documents. He carried the full file back to Meredith's office and knocked again on the open door. She was standing at her desk this time, not sitting. She read what he handed her. She read it faster than she had read anything else today. She set it down with deliberate care, the way you set down something fragile. When did he run the cross-reference? Jard told her. She nodded once. "Get him in here," she said, "and get me the head of legal." Jard turned to go. "Jard," she said it without raising her voice. He stopped. "Thank you, you did the right thing." He nodded. He went back to his desk. He sat down. His hands were very steady on the keyboard, which surprised him slightly because his heart was moving fast. The meeting with Elliot Marsh lasted 31 minutes. The door was closed. Meredith's voice from the corridor was inaudible. This itself was notable. She was not quiet in ordinary meetings. She projected naturally, the way people do when they have spent decades in rooms that required it. That she could not be heard meant she was speaking very quietly. When Marsh left the meeting, he walked at his usual pace down the corridor. He carried his portfolio. His face held its usual expression, measured, composed. But he had not buttoned his jacket back when he stood up, which was unlike him. The unbuttoned jacket moved slightly as he walked, and he did not fix it. He took the elevator down. He did not return that afternoon. Human Resources received a brief email from Meredith Voss's office at 6:17 p.m. It contained 2 attachments and 3 sentences. At 7:04 the following morning, a black company sedan left the Vantara Group building and moved through early traffic in the direction of the Fairfield district. Meredith Voss was in the back seat. She had brought no portfolio. She was wearing a charcoal coat over the previous day's clothes, which told anyone who knew her anything that she had not slept at home. She held a coffee cup from the lobby cafe and she did not drink from it. She watched the city past the window. She had Avery's address from the facility's work order. She had looked at it on her phone 4 times in the last 12 hours without doing anything with it. Now she had it in the car GPS. The Fairfield district arrived around her, older streets, bare November trees, red brick buildings with wide stoops. The sedan pulled up in front of a red brick building with a green door and a row of numbered buzzers. The driver asked if she wanted him to wait. She said yes. She got out. She looked up at the building for a moment. Second floor, the work order had listed Unit 2B. She could see a window with the curtains slightly open. A small rubber boot, just one, the mate presumably inside, stood on the windowsill of the unit below. She pressed 2B. A pause longer than she expected. Then the intercom clicked. "Who is it?" She identified herself. A longer pause, long enough that she wondered if he had simply decided not to respond. Long enough that she became aware of the cold, which she had not noticed until now. The door buzzed. She pushed it open. The staircase was carpeted in a pattern that had faded to a general warmth without specific color. The banister was smooth with use. She climbed to the second floor. The door to 2B was at the end of a short hallway. It was open. Daniel Avery was standing in the kitchen. He was wearing jeans and a gray thermal undershirt, the same one or one exactly like it. He was making tea, not coffee, tea. He had a kettle and 2 cups on the counter. He filled both without asking. The apartment was small, the kind of small that has been organized with care. Everything had a place and everything was in it. There was a small table near the window. There were 2 chairs. On the table, a library book lay open and face down, a novel. She could not see the title. On the wall near the refrigerator, a child's drawing had been framed. Simple felt-tip figures, green grass, a yellow disc for sun. Underneath in pencil, in careful child's handwriting, me and daddy and mommy in the garden. The tense of it, the present tense of it, in a child's hand. Meredith looked away from the drawing. She looked at the window. Daniel set one of the cups in front of her. He did not indicate a chair, but the configuration of the table suggested where a guest would sit. She sat. He sat across from her. The light from the window was flat and gray, early morning cloud-filtered light, without warmth, without angle. It fell on the table between them and illuminated nothing in particular. He waited. She had prepared what she was going to say. She had worked through it in the car, the phrasing, the sequencing, the combination of formal acknowledgement and human directness that the situation required. She had been in difficult conversations before, many of them. She had been in situations that required her to be the person in the room who held the shape of things together. She found, sitting across this kitchen table, that she had lost the prepared speech somewhere between the door buzzer and the drawing on the refrigerator. She placed both hands flat on the table. "We owe you money," she said. "A significant amount. The licensing payments for patent US 7,842,201 failed in 2019 and were never resolved. 4 years of royalties, $160,000 in held funds." She paused. "That's the first thing." He was looking at the table, not avoiding her, simply settled, listening. "The second thing," she said, "is that you were called off the repair job through a deliberate maneuver by someone in my organization who knew about the patent and chose not to disclose it." Another pause. "That person is no longer employed by Vantara." Silence. Outside, a car passed, 2 cars. The building made the minor sounds of a building in early morning, pipes, the distant clang of something in a lower unit, the hum of the refrigerator. Rosie's drawing moved almost imperceptibly in a draft from the window frame. "The third thing," Meredith said, and her voice had changed slightly, not softer exactly but differently calibrated, "is that when you were at our building 2 days ago, I was short with you, and dismissive. I want to acknowledge that directly." He looked up. He looked at her for a moment the way people look at things they are trying to accurately read, not hostility, not warmth, but a patient attention. "The roof still needs to be done," he said. It was such an unexpected response that she was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said, "it does. The northeast quadrant is at end of life. The HVAC flashing is a water infiltration risk every time it rains. If you wait until spring, you'll have deck damage." He said it the way he had said everything, without inflection, without performance, as information. She nodded. "I'd like you to come back and complete the work," she said. "I'd also like to arrange a meeting with our licensing team to formalize the resolution of the payment issue and ensure the royalty schedule going forward is in order." "All right," he said. And then, because she had expected conditions, had expected the careful layering of requirements that people in his situation were entitled to, she waited. He picked up his teacup. He held it in both hands. "I have 2 conditions," he said, "not about money." She folded her hands. "My report from Monday goes into the permanent maintenance record, unaltered, with my name on it." "Done," she said. "And the work order for the full repair scope goes through Precision Building Services, not subcontracted, not reviewed by your vendor relations office." He paused directly. "Done," she said again. He nodded once. "I can start Thursday," he said. "Weather forecast is clear through the weekend." She stood, she picked up the untouched teacup, and with the slightly awkward courtesy of someone who rarely found themselves in situations they hadn't controlled, carried it to the counter and set it by the sink. She put on her coat. She was at the door when he said her name, not Meredith, not Ms. Voss, just the name she'd given when she'd buzzed in. She turned. "The patent," he said, "you should know what it is." He said it not as though she was ignorant, but as though it was information she deserved to have accurately. It's a thermal membrane system that eliminates heat bridging at structural junctions. I designed it for a specific application, high-gradient roof systems in northern climates. I filed the patent in 2008 when I was working at Meridian. He paused. Your founding product line, your current product line. The membrane your company installs, that's the application. She held the door frame. I know, she said. I read the technical specification last night. Something that was not quite a smile crossed his face. It was very brief. It was in his eyes more than his mouth. Then you know it works, he said. She went down the stairs. She walked back through the green door and into the cold morning air and got into the black sedan. The driver pulled away without asking whether it had gone the way she'd intended. She looked out the window at the receding red brick building, the second-floor window with the curtains slightly open. She picked up her coffee from the cup holder. It was cold, she drank it anyway. Thursday came with the particular quality of light that belongs to November clear days, low and gold and long-shadowed, making everything look more significant than it probably was. The sky was the sharp blue that only appears after days of cloud, as though the weather had been hoarding it. Daniel Avery arrived at the Vantara Group building at 6:45 a.m. He signed in at the service desk. Marcus was there, same lukewarm coffee, same phone, and glanced up this time when Daniel wrote his name in the log. You're back, Marcus said. Roof work, Daniel said. Right, a pause, heard there was some kind of internal thing, you okay? Daniel clipped on his badge, fine. He took the service elevator to the roof. He had arranged a crew of two, a man named Tomas and a man named Gabriel, both experienced, both quiet workers who had worked with Daniel enough to know that he ran his jobs without narration. You did what needed doing, you did it correctly, you asked if you didn't know, you did not guess. The three of them began at the northeast quadrant. The work was methodical: strip the degraded membrane, inspect the deck below. In 2 sections the deck had absorbed moisture and required replacement. Daniel had anticipated this from his initial report. They replaced it. They installed new insulation. They laid new modified bitumen membrane in overlapping courses, heating each lap with a torch to create a waterproof bond. They reflashed the HVAC stack with new galvanized flashing, properly secured, properly sealed. It was physical, attentive, continuous work, the kind that fills the available mental space completely, leaving room for nothing else. Daniel had chosen it partly for this reason and had never said so to anyone. At 11:30, Tomas burned his forearm on the torch, briefly, superficially, the way it happens on every roofing job at some point. Daniel had a first aid kit in his bag. He cleaned and dressed the burn in 4 minutes and sent Tomas on a 20-minute break. He continued working alone in the interval without adjusting his pace. At 1:15, Jard Cho came up to the roof. He came through the stairwell door with a wary look, clearly someone who was not comfortable on roofs but had come anyway. He held a water bottle in each hand, which he had apparently thought to bring as a reason to be there, or as an offering, or both. He gave one to Daniel. Daniel took it, twisted off the cap, and drank without sitting down. Mr. Avery, Jard said, I'm the one who found the licensing file. I wanted you to know that. Daniel looked at him. I work for Ms. Voss. I found it during a document pull. I brought it to her immediately. A pause. Jard appeared to feel that more needed to be said, or that he should be given some response to measure himself against. I know you could have kept working, and we might never have known the scope of what. You did the right thing, Daniel said. Thank you. Jard absorbed this. He nodded. He turned to go. Jard, Daniel said. He turned back. Your water bottle, Daniel said and handed it back. He had his own in his bag. He had simply not wanted to refuse the gesture. Jard went back down the stairs holding both bottles, slightly uncertain whether anything had gone the way he'd planned it, and somewhat reassured regardless. The repair work was finished at 4:48 p.m. on Friday, 48 hours from commencement, within the estimate. Daniel walked the finished roof in a final inspection grid, the same grid he had used on Monday, the same systematic pattern north to south, east to west, pausing at each junction and each field seam. He ran his torch over 3 lap seams he wanted to verify. He took moisture readings at 12 locations, all clear. He took photographs, he loaded them into the report. He wrote the completion report on his phone in the van before he started the engine, straightforward, precise, numbered, with all findings, all replaced materials, all measurements. In the narrative field at the bottom of the report, where contractors typically wrote nothing or wrote work completed per scope, he wrote, Initial diagnostic and roof survey completed by D. Avery, 11-12-0640-1434. Repair crew T. Reyes G. Barrientos D. Avery, 11/1411/15. All deck damage documented in preliminary report filed 11/12 was confirmed on opening. Repair executed per best practice standards for modified bitumen systems in northern climate applications. Estimated additional service life of repaired system, 12-15 years subject to annual inspection. Full maintenance log appended. He submitted the report. He put the van in drive. He picked up Rosie from the after-school program at 5:15, 14 minutes later than usual. She was sitting on the front steps of the community center with her backpack and her coat, and a drawing she had made blue and green, which was her current preferred palette. She stood up when she saw the van. He got out and walked to her and crouched down to her eye level, which he had been doing since she was small and had never stopped. "Sorry I'm late." "It's okay," she said. "I made you something." She showed him the drawing. It was a house, his reading of it, a blue rectangle with a peaked roof and a door. On the roof, a small figure in gray, a person on a roof. "Is that me?" he asked. She looked at it critically. "The person is you," she said. "I wasn't sure how to draw a roof good." "It's excellent," he said. She considered this. "It's pretty good," she conceded. He folded the drawing carefully and put it in his breast pocket. He picked up her backpack. They walked to the van. The public meeting was held on the following Monday at 10 a.m. in the lobby atrium of the Vantara Group building. It had not been announced as a public meeting. It had been called as an all-staff briefing, standard format, monthly occurrence, usually delivered from the 14th floor via video link to all offices. Meredith had changed the format. She had called it in person in the lobby, and she had asked facilities to set up a microphone and a small platform near the front desk. She had also asked that the service entrance be left accessible, because the contractor finishing the roof inspection would need access that morning. The atrium filled with staff at 9:55, 237 people across regional operations, represented by approximately 40 who were physically present and the remainder on live video links to the secondary offices. The security desk, Marcus's desk, was staffed but quiet. The framed patent from the 14th floor had been brought down. It stood on an easel to the left of the platform. Jard stood at the back of the atrium. He had arrived at 8, which was usual. He had not slept particularly well, which was also becoming usual. At 9:58, the service entrance opened. Daniel Avery walked in. He was in his work clothes. He carried his canvas bag. He had not known the meeting was happening. He was there to file the closeout inspection form at the facility's desk. He stopped when he saw the crowd. Jard saw him stop. He walked across the atrium to where Daniel stood. "Stay," Jard said quietly, "please." Daniel looked at him. "Ms. Voss asked that you be here for this." A pause. "She didn't call ahead because she thought you might not come." Something passed across Daniel's face, not quite amusement, not quite resignation. He set his canvas bag on the floor and folded his arms and stood. He did not move toward the front. He stood where he was, near the service entrance, with his back to the wall. Meredith stepped to the microphone at exactly 10:00. She was wearing the gray blazer. Her hair was pulled back as always. She looked like she had slept, which Jard knew was only partly true. She did not use notes. "I want to begin this morning," she said, with an acknowledgement. She spoke for 9 minutes. She spoke clearly and without softening the relevant facts. She described the patent, its significance to Vantara's founding technology, its assignment to Daniel Avery. She described the payment lapse not as an accident lost in the machinery of a large organization, but as a failure of the basic obligation that came with using another person's work. She described her own role in that failure, not direct but present in every meeting about technology and product lines and competitive advantage where the foundation beneath those conversations had not been examined. She described a deliberate decision. She did not name Marsh, did not perform his exposure, but made clear that a decision had been made within this organization by someone operating within this organization to obscure rather than illuminate what had been found. She turned then to the easel, to the framed patent. She read the patent number aloud. "The technology on that wall," she said, "was created by a structural engineer named Daniel Avery. He created it when he was 30 years old. He designed it for northern climate applications, filed for patent protection in 2008, and assigned the licensing rights to Vantara Group in 2015. A pause. "He has been our landlord, technically speaking, for 6 years. We should have been treating him accordingly." She looked toward the back of the atrium. 237 people, and the security guard and the 2 reception staff, and the man at the facility's desk followed her gaze to where Daniel Avery stood against the wall near the service entrance with his arms folded and his canvas bag at his feet. He did not move, he did not look away. She said, "I apologize to him publicly and directly for the failure to meet our obligations, and for a management environment in which information that should have been brought forward was instead used as a tool. Both of those things happened in this company on my watch, I own that." She paused. "The financial resolution is in process." She paused again. "What cannot be fully resolved is the time, the years, the work done without what was owed." One more pause, the longest, the quietest. "I am sorry for that." The atrium was silent in the way large spaces are silent when everyone in them chooses to be, the kind of silence that has a temperature and a weight. Daniel uncrossed his arms. He picked up his canvas bag. He walked through the atrium toward the facility's desk, and the crowd parted for him, not dramatically but naturally, the way people move for someone whose direction is clear. He reached the desk. He set down the closeout inspection form. The facility's manager, a woman named Patricia who had been at Vantara for 11 years and had processed hundreds of work orders, stamped the form and looked at him over the edge of her glasses. "Good work," she said. "Thank you," he said. "Tomas and Gabriel did most of the deck replacement. They're good workers." She wrote their names on the form. He turned and walked back toward the service entrance. As he passed Jard, he paused. "Thank you," he said seriously. Jard nodded, his throat moved. Daniel walked out through the service entrance. He crossed the lower parking bay to his white Ford Transit van. He got in. He started the engine. He pulled out of the bay and turned onto the street and joined the ordinary flow of Tuesday morning traffic. He had a 10:45 at a residential property in the northeast part of the city, a homeowner with a chimney flashing issue that had been leaking for 2 seasons. He had the address in the GPS. He drove toward it without the radio on. The licensing resolution was completed the following week. The held funds were released and processed. $160,000, $4 years of unpaid royalties with interest as calculated by Legal's independent review. The ongoing royalty agreement was redrawn, new terms, new contact information, an automated payment system that would not be subject to address changes without a dual verification update. Legal sent the documents. Daniel had a brief call with Vantara's licensing director, a careful woman named Helen Park, who spoke as though she were documenting her own words as she said them. At the end of the call, she said, "I understand you're still working as a contractor." "Yes," he said. A pause. She seemed to search for something. "That's an interesting choice." "I like fixing things," he said simply. It was not quite a complete answer, and both of them knew it, and neither of them pressed it. He signed the documents. He returned them by email. He closed his laptop. He was at the kitchen table. It was 4:27 p.m. The light from the window was beginning its approach toward the 4:30 angle. He watched it come. In the weeks that followed, a few things changed and most things didn't. Jard Cho received a formal commendation in his personnel file. It was written by Meredith in terms more direct than HR usually preferred. He put the printed copy in his desk drawer. He did not show it to anyone. He thought about it sometimes when he was filing documents, which was frequently. The maintenance log for Vantara Group's regional headquarters was updated with Daniel's complete report, all of it, unaltered, with his name on the cover page. Patricia had added a note, prepared by D. Avery, Precision Building Services. This report exceeds standard diagnostic requirements and should be retained as baseline for all future work. Meredith Voss had the framed patent brought back to the 14th floor. She had a small additional plate mounted below the existing frame, which contained the patent number, the date of filing, and a single line, designed by Daniel James Avery, license 2015. She had not asked Daniel's permission for this. She hoped he would consider it appropriate. She did not know if he had ever seen it because he had not been back to the 14th floor. His subsequent work orders for the scheduled maintenance visits listed the service entrance and the roof access door. He did not go up to the executive corridor. He did not need to. In January, Rosie finished learning the 12 bars of the Chopin Nocturne and moved on to the next 16. Her playing had acquired a quality that was difficult to name, not precision alone, not feeling alone, but a kind of patient accuracy that was its own form of expression. She played in the evenings after dinner, and Daniel sat at the kitchen table and listened without moving. Sometimes he opened the licensing agreement document on his laptop while she played and looked at the numbers. Not with calculation, he had already made the calculations. He had set up an education account. He had had the boots resoled a third time because they were good boots and he saw no reason to replace what could be repaired. He did not look at the numbers with relief exactly. He looked at them the way you look at something that has confirmed what you already knew, that the work was real, that it had always been real, that it had mattered before anyone acknowledged it and would have mattered if no one ever had. One evening in late January, cold, clear, the kind of cold that makes the city precise and sharp at its edges, he came home from a job site to find Rosie asleep at the kitchen table with her face on her arms and a library book open beneath her. The piano was silent, the apartment was quiet. The light from the hallway fell across the table in a warm stripe. He stood in the kitchen doorway for a while. He moved very carefully so as not to wake her. He took her jacket from the hook by the door, he laid it over her shoulders. He sat down across from her in the other chair in the quiet. He sat there for a long time doing nothing in the 4:30 light. On a roof somewhere in the city, a patch held against the cold. It held the way good work holds, not because it announced itself, but because it was done correctly, because the lap joints were sealed and the flashing was secured and the deck beneath was sound. It held through February's snow and March's freeze-thaw cycle and the early April rains. It held without anyone thinking about it, which is exactly what good work is supposed to do. Below the roof, inside the building, the ordinary life of the place continued, meetings and memos and quarterly reviews, and the low ambient hum of people trying to do their jobs inside institutions larger than themselves. The light changed floor by floor as the year turned. The framed pat on the 14th floor caught the morning light from a certain angle and threw a small bright rectangle on the opposite wall. No one stopped to notice it most days. Most days, that is exactly as it should be.